Hello, I'm Rob Westervelt, editor of Chemical Week, welcoming you to the 2019 GPCA Forum in Dubai. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Bob Patel, Chairman and CEO of LyondellBasell. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you again.
So you're giving one of the keynotes here. Give us some of the highlights about what are the messages that you're talking about at the event?
Well, the idea that I had was I thought I'd talk about new forces or trends that are impacting our industry. So if you think back to prior conferences, we've often talked about the importance of feedstock advantage. We've talked about the importance of the growing middle class in China and India and where to locate the production. So I think all those things are going to be important, but what I'll highlight in my presentation are four forces that are emerging as trends that will impact our industry. Those four forces are the importance of trade and the fact that there are external factors impacting that, digitization, sustainability, in the sense of the impact we have in how we make our products, and then plastic waste, which is what happens with our products after they're consumed. So those four trends, and I'll show some data that indicates the impact of those.
And on the plastics waste issue, obviously a lot of activity in 2019 with the formation of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. How would you assess industry's progress? What progress has been made in the last year, and how long is this going to take?
Well, so first of all, from an industry perspective, we launched the Alliance to End Plastic Waste earlier this year. It was in January. It seems that it was even longer ago. And we're making excellent progress. We've named a new CEO, Jacob Dorr. Jacob and his team will be based in Singapore. We're deploying on multiple fronts. If you'll recall, we said that our strategic pillars were infrastructure, innovation, education, and cleanup. So we're deploying on projects along all of those fronts. And there's meaningful progress. We have nearly 50 member companies now across the value chain. So I think in a year we've come a long way. And as we said early on, that it wasn't one solution that was going to solve the challenge of plastic waste. We'd have to move on multiple fronts. And so we're doing that.
And I've, sitting here in Dubai in the Middle East, LyondellBasell has some Saudi joint ventures. Talk about, one of your presentation, you mentioned in your presentation, one of the key themes was some of the changing dynamics. And how do you see that impacting the Middle East in terms of, I guess, things like trade and feedstock advantage? And how does that tie into your Saudi JVs and also future considerations for investment?
Well, I think in terms of trade, it's really being able to be dynamic in terms of our marketing plan and shifting trade flows depending on where the value is. Sometimes the value is impacted by tariffs and so on, sometimes not. So I think being agile will be very important. And as one of the main marketers of the product from our JVs here, it's our commitment to our partners that we'll get the best value we can for the product. Secondly, in terms of manufacturing, I do think that more emphasis on reducing emissions from our facilities here, and also implementing digitization to enable a better reliability, get more output, and keep our workers safe as well. So we'll be applying these things over time. We've been involved here in Saudi Arabia in the joint ventures for more than a decade. I sat on the boards of these ventures from 2010 to 2015. So we're very proud of our partnerships here, and the plants are running extremely well.
And we sit here in December. What scenarios are you looking at in 2020? What do you expect from an overall supply-demand perspective? And what are you using for your planning?
Well, first, as perspective, if we consider 2019, the back half of the year was certainly very challenging. Yeah. We had unexpected headwinds from a lot of different areas. We had trade headwinds. Auto and generally durable sectors were weaker this year compared to last year. We also had the anticipation of all this new capacity coming, so there was a lot of destocking that occurred in the value chain. And lastly, globally, there were a lot of fears about recession. So when you think about demand, we've had a lot of headwinds this year. Next year, my sense is that more of the capacity that's expected to come online, we'll see it come online. but there have been some more delays that have been announced, incrementally a quarter or two. But it seems to me that, especially in the ethylene polyethylene chain, markets are finding bottom. When you look at margins in Asia, they're at trough levels today. So I think now it's a question of how much longer we will stay at these sort of levels. But the destocking part has already taken place.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because any small improvement in demand should create a meaningful impact in the entire value chain in terms of pull-through.
Okay. Is there any broader concern about GDP weakness? I mean, it's your sense that 2019 was largely an inventory and driven event, or?
Yeah, I think GDP is weaker around the world. If you look at China, numbers that I've seen indicate 6% growth, which is somewhat weak relative to China. Europe has been 1% or less, pretty weak, and US is 2%. So pretty weak GDP numbers. But despite that, in the consumer-oriented end uses, we're still seeing good demand growth. And recently I read that polyethylene demand growth is expected to be 4% globally year over year.
Yeah.
So not bad in a pretty difficult environment.
And in that type of difficult environment, what are the levers that you pull? What's your message to the team? What are you focused on?
Well, I think it's first and foremost safe and reliable operations. We're doing more to look at our cost structure to see if we can be even more efficient. My sense is that's not really so much about the number of people we have employed, but how we deploy them and how they're effective. So we're doing a lot more to improve efficiency from the existing assets. And of course, running at high rates helps a lot.
Yeah. And we touched on one element of sustainability there, and the discussion around plastics, but there's also the discussion around CO2 and CO2 mitigation. What do you see as the key industry trends there, and what is Lyondell doing, and how do you see that impacting the industry?
Well, so CO2 regulations we think will continue to become stricter over time. The conversation is much more active in Europe, but like other things that we've seen in our industry, typically these trends start in Europe and then they tend to spread throughout the world. So we're doing a couple things. First of all, we're implementing a circular steam project which reduces CO2 emissions at our PO plant in Botlek. So it's our joint venture plant with Covestro. And I'm going to talk about that in my presentation tomorrow. It'll reduce CO2 emissions considerably, and it makes a meaningful step for the government of the Netherlands to reduce CO2 emissions in the country. We're also doing some pilot sort of studies at some of our German sites to see what else could we do to reduce CO2 emissions. So we're being proactive, and we'll look for economic projects where we can. But clearly this has to be a focus going forward.
One more question. I'll end on digitalization, the other element that you mentioned. What is LyondellBasell doing in the area today? And over the near term, what kind of impact do you see it having on LyondellBasell and the broader industry?
Well, so in manufacturing, we have a big focus in applying digitization. Part of that is analyzing data in different ways to predict unreliability in more unconventional ways than we have in the past. Also connecting our workforce digitally. So for example, when somebody's going out to do maintenance work, they have a handheld device that has all the information on it, and the permitting process and all of that is more automated so that they don't have to go back and forth from a office back to the plant. So that creates efficiency. We're also thinking through how we can serve customers better by using digitization. So Rob, I think we're going to apply this across the entire P&L over time, but I see today the greatest leverage in manufacturing.
Great. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.